Perfectly fine conversation in order to give a speech, and so I'm doing that to you. So just, Louis, I can't help but notice that you put my last session on right before lunch and this next one right before the wine. So we really do want to roll through this rather quickly. I'm joined by Joe Helble of Dartmouth, and we're going to just quickly review some of the initiatives on manufacturing initiatives, reauthorization of the Competes Act, and the federal budget outlook. I've got the first one, and Joe's got the last two. It has occurred to me, as I've listened to the talk with just a little bit of horror, everything that is in my talk has been said before and far better than I'm going to say it. So take this as merely just a quick little review, just to maybe sort of lock it into your mind so you know what to do tomorrow. And you know that we have changed this colloquium somewhat compared to in the past, where we've really tried to zero in on a theme in order that we might have more clout after the visits tomorrow. And certainly it's also well timed that this is coming right after the State of the Union address. So let's see what we can do. So again, we're going to run through this quickly. There's so many initials, so I had to put together the secret decoder ring. So I think by now you've heard them all enough times that you know what NNMI is and what MII, which is one of the NNMIs, and then the NAMII is the first of the MIIs. And this is all brought about thanks to PCAST, which was advised by AMP. So you got that, right? So again, you know, as engineers, we like acronyms, so we're throwing a few at you. All right, let's keep going. So by now, we know all about the sequence of reports from PCAST, and it was the AMP Steering Committee which proposed the formation of Manufacturing Innovation Institutes, you know, collected together through the national network of manufacturing institutes. So this is a, you know, this is a key, you know, a key move in the country to try to establish these manufacturing institutes. The title on this one's actually wrong. The first MII, which is the National Additive Manufacturing Innovation Institute, is not led by Case Western University, although they certainly play a vital role, but it's really more of a level consortium of universities both in Ohio and in Pennsylvania. In fact, I think we have quite a few of the member schools are present today. So this is the first one, kind of a pilot program to see if one of these institutes would do well. We have some early reviews on the NAMII, you know, the Additive Manufacturing Institute. And you can read this as well as I can. According to the chair of the Department of Material Science and Engineering at Case Western, the NAMII has already resulted in cross-institutional collaboration between Ohio universities, notably Case Western, Akron, and Youngstown State. So the desired impact seems to be happening. So that's a good thing, linking the universities together. But it's also done a good job to link the universities to industry. So a faculty member also at Case Western says, we've had a number of companies who never considered additive manufacturing as part of their business processes, and thus it has started new conversations about the role of this technology in the region. And I won't read through all of the rest. But again, this was the desired impact, so it seems to be working. There is legislation to establish the NNMI. Sherrod Brown, who is a senator from Ohio, did introduce the legislation in 2012. Of course, it's a new Congress, so it has to be reintroduced, and I understand that he is going to reintroduce it. And of course, I don't know what the president's going to say tonight, but it wouldn't surprise me if this didn't go hand in glove with what the president may announce. So it is very likely that tomorrow this could be a very specific piece of legislation that you will want to focus on, you know, to help, you know, well, get some action on this area. So this looks to be a key piece of legislation. There is other legislation which I've learned about. I want to make sure I get this right. Mark Matthews, I don't know if you're in the room somewhere, but thanks a lot. You gave me a lot of the background information for this, along with Bill Kelly, who's also lurking back there. But Mark and Bill have alerted me to other legislation which is out there. Again, I won't read it, but especially if you're from New York or California or Rhode Island, there's other things that you may want to focus in on if you meet with those delegations. So here's some of the supportive statements you might make tomorrow. And again, all of this is obvious and it's been said many times over. Manufacturing is important to the economy, and I forget which of our speakers, said jobs. I mean, this is about jobs. This is an important thing. It's certainly, no one needs to tell you it's a bipartisan thing. So very important to the health of the economy. It's necessary to maintain engineering capacity. So we've seen another number of graphs showing kind of a trough in the middle, a new version of the Valley of Death, if you will, where due to a lack of advanced manufacturing, we have some difficulty in taking some of our R&D work and getting it out into production, into the economy. So we need a greater focus there. Collaboration is the key to innovation in manufacturing, and examples being Semitech and the Fraunhofer institutes in Germany. And again, I think you are familiar with those. And federal role helps to capture the full value of investments in engineering, research, and education. I'll say just a little bit more about that. So here are the two points of pushback that you might hear tomorrow. So the first is the concept is good, but where will the funds come from? I'm actually hoping that President Obama answers that for us. Maybe he'll say something, and then all you have to say is what he said. You just give him one of those. But clearly, this is not even a zero-sum game that we're in, regrettably. So budgets are declining, funding is declining. It does require some tough decisions. I don't really know what an easy answer is to this one. I think we simply have to make the argument that it could be so vital to us and do so much to boost the economy that hopefully people will see that it should be a priority. And then the second statement is the government does not have a role here. Other policy approaches are more appropriate. I say that with a little bit of irony because one of my colleagues spoke of CCAM this morning and did point out that we launched CCAM without benefit of federal investment. So it can be done, but it's hard to do it that way. And I forget which of our speakers pointed out that states have no problem with this. Oftentimes we're competing among the states. So, one state is trying to lure a major manufacturer company to leave state X and go to state Y. So we kind of play this game all the time, but we should also remember that this is an international phenomenon. So there's a lot of work which is global, and I really think the federal government has a role to play here to help foster these manufacturing innovation institutes. And another way I would present it, if the question came to me, is imagine what our friends in India or China or Germany or Brazil might be doing. I don't think they would waste a minute, thinking too hard about this one. If they could lure these facilities to their country and have all the benefits that would come from it, we should do the same. In fact, I would say this is a distinctly American model, and it seems odd that in America we struggle to adopt the model that we've laid down for the rest of the world. There's also an argument for proximity, and it's probably just easiest for me to read this one. This came out of a December 2012 report. These linkages between manufacturing and innovation mean that the success of knowledge-based services like R&D often depend on the success of domestic production activities. As President George Bush's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology put it, the proximity of research, development, and manufacturing, and I would emphasize and manufacturing, is very important to leading edge manufacturers. So again, R&D is enhanced by having the manufacturing base present and vice versa. So there's a real argument to be made for proximity. Now, I think I'm now the third person to present the AMP starter list of MII. So the first time you saw it, you remember that it was that blizzard of 4-point font and no one could read it, and the second speaker made it kind of legible. I've actually broken it into 2 slides. So I'm going to show it to you one more time. And so if you remember what happened recently with the Monopoly board game, they had a vote on which token, got the axe and another one which should come in. So the iron is gone and a kitty cat is in. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. But hang on to that old Monopoly game of yours because it's a keeper now. But in any event, so I'm going to, just quickly read through these. So I want you to imagine which one of these goes and what's missing. What would you vote for to be on this list? So maybe when we get into the general Q&A, that might be part of it. So here we go. Advanced sensing, measurement, and process control, advanced materials design and synthesis, information technologies, including visualization and digital manufacturing, sustainable manufacturing, nano-manufacturing, flexible electronics, biomanufacturing and bioinformatics, additive manufacturing, that one's already in, advanced manufacturing equipment, industrial robotics, and advanced forming and joining. So I don't know. Decide which one is the iron and figure if there's a kitty cat that needs to go in. And I'm almost done. So later, I'm going to turn this over to Joe now, but later when we get into the Q&A, I might have you focus your attention on two things. What steps should the Engineering Deans Council take on the creation of a national network of manufacturing innovation? Do you support it or not? I mean, should we have a collective opinion on this? And secondly, which is the question I just asked you, what should be the research priorities in advanced manufacturing? Is there anything that should be added or subtracted from the AMP Steering Committee's starter list? So I hope that's in your mind. And at this point, Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dick. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk very briefly about competes, and then we'll come back to sequestration. And there, too, I'll be very brief because I think it was covered in a great amount of detail and very clearly and helpfully by some of our speakers this morning. When we got together in October to plan for this meeting, we realized that the competes reauthorization was in fact expiring earlier this year, and we expected this to be an important topic for discussion in this Congress. This is something that has occupied discussion at prior PPC meetings, and we thought it would be worth spending a few minutes refreshing everyone on the background and history and talking about where we might be heading. But in October, I think many of us, perhaps most of us, didn't quite anticipate that sequestration would not only not be solved, but be kicked down the road and be staring us in the face a few weeks after this meeting. So in pulling together our slides, we decided to just be very brief with regard to competes and instead spend some of the time talking about, I think, the issue that's going to occupy most of our conversations tomorrow, and that is sequestration first and then manufacturing if we get into more detail. So by way of background, I think most of us know America Competes was reauthorized in 2010, and it retains the central policy cores that were part of the 2007 Act. And it was primarily a vehicle to provide increased funding for R&D in the physical sciences and engineering. NSF significantly, but not exclusively, and also beyond R&D to provide support for certain federal STEM education programs. In the 2010 reauthorization, there were some new programs that were identified and established. Those are listed here. But as with its predecessor, the original bill in 2007, Competes legislation is a piece of authorizing legislation, of course, not appropriations legislation. And funding, not surprisingly, has been and continues to be a challenge. And in fact, outside on one of the tables where ASEE has its briefing materials put together, they may still be there, but this morning there were some briefing pamphlets that had the funding history of Competes through the first part of its history from 2007 to 2010. So you could see how funding, while it was being provided at an increasing level relative to recent history for the physical sciences and engineering, with the passage of Competes, never quite reached the levels that were authorized with the original legislation, and that has certainly been the case with the reauthorization. So what's going to happen with Competes at this point in time? Well, I think you can speculate as well as you can speculate as well as we. I think we are all continue to be cautiously optimistic that there will be reauthorizing legislation that will move forward in this Congress. Current expectations are that there may well be a bill initially in late spring to early summer. As with its predecessors, we expect it to cover NSF, NIST, and the DOE Office of Science. Energy R&D is expected to be handled separately. Will this be something that's embraced in a bipartisan fashion, as was the original bill in 2007? Again, I think any of us can speculate. Current history and the history of the reauthorization, as was noted this morning, may cause one to be less than fully optimistic. How's that for choosing words carefully going forward here? What will the authorization levels be? How long will it last? Will it be another 3-year piece of legislation? Really, these are things that are up for discussion. And so all I would say here with regard to Competes is if you have an opportunity to have a broader conversation with your representatives or their staff tomorrow, let's not leave Competes completely off the table. Let's remind them that this was, in fact, very important to the physical science and engineering community, set out goals for funding for education and R&D that are broadly supported by this group, are in fact very necessary for our technological and economic competitiveness. Now, there was a hearing about a week ago, not specifically focused on competes, but addressing some of the broad themes associated with competes. This was a House Science Committee hearing February 6th. Several of us will, in fact, be meeting with Representative Smith and staff from the House Science Committee tomorrow. And these are just some comments from testimony at that hearing. These are comments from Shirley Ann Jackson, the president of RPI, but these are points that she, Chuck Vest, who also testified, and others have made consistently, that of course are worth reinforcing. That we need a new financial model that can overcome the so-called valley of death for entrepreneurial technology-based startups. Mechanisms for taking inventions and discoveries from our labs, our faculty's labs, from our students and their project work, and helping it bridge the gap to the point where it's ready for venture financing and then significant full-blown major investment. Equally important is the physical capital that allows new technologies to be improved and scaled. Facilities for applied research, including shared infrastructure, prototyping, testing of new technologies, and so on. Again, very much related to the advanced manufacturing initiatives that have been discussed today. And then, of course, labor, as our last panel articulated quite nicely, is something that we cannot lose sight of. Now, competes and, of course, advanced manufacturing are of continuing importance, but as I said at the outset, the immediate challenge I think we're facing and is important to address tomorrow is one associated with sequestration. Here's a cartoon. I don't think Jeff Mervis claims authorship, but it appeared in Science very recently. The bullet points here on the side have been discussed in great detail this morning. March 1st and March 27th are the important deadlines. If you're interested in more detail, if you haven't picked these up already, I'd encourage you to do so. These are briefing materials put together by AAU and APLU, the land-grant universities, that were on the table outside and nicely lay out in fairly stark financial terms the impact of the sequester on R&D. Points, it's just a couple points I'll make briefly in closing because these have not been made earlier. We did talk about the Budget Control Act. We did talk about what this means in terms of R&D spending. To put it in context, these levels associated with the Budget Control Act are already significantly lower than historical averages R&D support as a function of GDP. In fact, we're looking at the lowest levels in 50 years, and sequestration will further reduce the amount of funding available for R&D. We are considering doing this at a time when other countries, particularly China, Singapore, and South Korea, are showing double-digit increases in R&D spending. The point about investment has been made, but let me make one point that hasn't been made. These cuts would come at a time when we have finally reversed a 30-year decline in the production of engineering degrees in this country. We all know that there was a peak in 1984, 1985 in the production of bachelor's degrees in engineering in this country. Many of us were students at that time. Steep decline, low levels of engineering degrees being granted. About 5 years ago, there started to be a much broader public conversation about the need to invest in STEM and to encourage students to study science, technology, math, and of course engineering. There's been a significant enough reversal that I suspect when the 2012 data are finally published, we will see that not only did we have a strong showing in the number of engineering graduates in the U.S. in 2012, but it may well be the highest in 30 years, potentially the largest number of bachelor's degrees ever granted in engineering in this country. And if you look at all of our current senior, junior, sophomore, and even freshman enrollments, right now it looks as if the trend is very positive. Those numbers are going to continue to go up. I certainly think it's worth making the point to our representatives. Do we really want to be cutting funding and support for infrastructure at the time when we finally reversed a trend that we've been fighting for 30 years? Now, the bottom line in this, of course, is that in making these points, local stories are very important. Engineering enrollments at each of our specific universities, projects that students have taken and turned into companies that have resulted in jobs, R&D in our faculty laboratories that have been turned into startups that have created jobs in the local environment, and the impact of the immediate spending cuts on R&D at your university. Making this very local is something that's very important for us to do. Let me just, as a final point, add a personal note. I actually spent a year, I think many of you know, my one sabbatical as an academic, I spent a year as a AAAS fellow working in the Senate on Capitol Hill. And I can tell you that many, many people would stop by the office to articulate their particular position, argue for their point of view. The science and engineering community was noticeably absent. I think in general we're very reticent to go and press the case, particularly if we think our representative's point of view is already decided. It's absolutely important that we take the time to be there tomorrow if you can, other times when you're in Washington, to press the case even if you've already got their support, and let them know just how important that R&D support is to your institution, but also to local job creation and to the country broadly. So just wrapping up, final points, be positive, recognizing that there are budget issues, but don't be afraid to talk about the importance of what's happening at your university in this representative's district. R&D has traditionally had very strong bipartisan support. That isn't changing, but there are very difficult choices that senators and representatives need to make in difficult budgetary times. I think it's important that we recognize they have to make difficult choices, but at the same time argue strongly that scientific R&D is, as an editorial in Science said very recently, the seed corn that we need to protect to invest for the future.